Hey folks, walk with me. The Delphi verdict watch is still ongoing, and I put out a video about this last week, and it's not my intention to do true crime walk with me's this frequently, but I realized I put that video out, and I think maybe because of how long it got, I just neglected to mention a bunch of other things. So I thought, well, at the time that I'm making this video, we're still on verdict watch, so whether or not we are when this comes out, I don't know. But here are, I'm going to try to remember the remaining things that I forgot to include in the last video, that are just sort of lingering questions that I have now that the state has put on its case and the defense put on the case, probably not that they wanted to put on, but that they were able to put on. Doug Carter, who was the voice and the face of a lot of this from the law enforcement perspective, tentacles. I went back and I looked at some of his comments on the case as it was ongoing, right, and just dragging out for years and years, and everyone was kind of like in this mindset of, you have audio, you have video, you have phones being tracked. How in the world do you have audio and video and location of the person who you think did this, and you can't identify them in this tiny town? And that's where then sort of questions around, like, could this have been somebody passing through, a trucker, or, you know, something like this. But one of his responses that sort of came up in different ways frequently was around this idea that there were many tentacles to this. And I think he said something about, like, in his 40-year career, so I could be misremembering the number of years, that this was one of the most complex cases that he's ever encountered. And I'm just looking at it now and thinking, how do you square that with then trying to convict or putting to trial one person, right, a single male offender who apparently, by his well into his middle age, had not committed any previous crimes, had not offended since then, and had been interviewed in the days after the event occurred. How is arresting one person, like a single actor, committing a single crime, or, you know, like, it's multiple crimes technically, but committing this act alone, and apparently being in a position where he in part did what he did, or at least left the scene as he did, because he was spooked and interrupted. I don't know how you square that with this idea that there's tentacles and it's the most complex investigation that you've ever been a part of. Unless I completely mistook the way in which he meant those words, and what he meant was that it was incredibly complex with all the methods that they were trying, or all the ways in which they were trying to come to some conclusion on the perpetrators here, and it was just sort of like shocking that with all of that effort and all of those resources, and with audio and video, that they couldn't get it across the finish line. Unless that's what he meant, which, like, if that's what he meant, is a really weird way to state it. I always took that as him meaning that there was, you know, multiple people and or entities involved, and this was like a really convoluted sort of weaving tale that was going to be told one day. The other thing is, you know, there's this brief interview with him after Richard Allen's arrest, and the reporter asks something like, you know, can you speak to whether or not you think that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy? The assertion, for as far back as I remember anyway, being that Bridge Guy was the perp, or was one of them. And he gives another very weird answer there, where he is like, it's a story that will be told, right? The judge had enough to sign the PCA, but today is not the day to tell that story. And again, he makes it sound like it's not relatively as straightforward as what's in the PCA, which, now having gone through the trial, heard all of the state's case, there wasn't another like great story to tell. There weren't other tentacles. There wasn't other sort of deep complexity to unravel beyond that. So again, unless there's some reason for which he's speaking in these like weird, seemingly coded languages, I don't understand how to square these two things together, from what he's saying versus now what is being tried and presented as statement of fact. The other thing is the sketches. And the sketches, I think, were always problematic because this first sketch came out and then the second sketch came out significantly later, and it looked nothing like the first sketch. And then again, Doug Carter saying something along the lines of like, we think this person fits sort of in between these two sketches, which is like a really weird, like if you know that, why don't you create a sketch that is between those two sketches? I don't get it. I don't get it. And I do think Richard Allen looks a bit like the first sketch. I think he looks nothing like the second sketch. And it's just weird to have two sketches like that in the first place, I think. Especially with the distance, time-wise, in between them being released. So there's that. And then the other thing is this whole business around the clothing. Right? And I'm not going to go into the grave details here, but the idea that a single perpetrator, and I understand a person can be in crazed states and people have like moved cars to get them off their children and stuff like that. So I don't discount the idea that like people can do, I'm going to put astounding in quotes because I don't mean astounding in a great way, but they can do sort of seemingly superhuman tasks, being that they can lift great weights, move exceptionally quickly, whatever, when they're just in an incredibly heightened state. But this whole idea that, he was trying to commit one crime, ended up committing another because he got spooked by this van or whatever. But I still don't understand, and maybe I missed something from the trial because of the way I'll have to get the information from the trial is very indirect. So if I missed it, just comment it below, and I'm happy to have missed it and just not captured something. But how that's sort of the series of events where he's trying to commit one crime, gets spooked, commits a different crime, and then like throws some twigs and leaves. How that sort of matches up then with this changing of the clothes, right? Where all of the clothes are removed from one victim, placed on, not like on top of, like dressed the other victim in those clothes. That's another one where I'm like, I don't really see how to square these things and make them make sense. And again, maybe this is something I missed, something I misunderstood. But if not, it seems like a really big miscalculation, especially if a not guilty verdict comes back. It seems like a really big miscalculation on the state's part to not sort those things out at trial and make them make sense. Because again, if any of the jury is having some of these same questions, it might be a tough battle to get to 12 guilties, and therefore then one guilty verdict. But I don't know that they would have this lengthy history, right? Presumably these people had less knowledge than the average person about the case as it was ongoing. So I don't know if they'll have all of this context of Doug Carter that I'm mentioning. But, you know, he did a lot of, weird sort of speaking in some sort of, I don't know, riddle-like language all along. And I don't know if there was any meaning to that, if it was his way of wanting to present it for some reason, or if it just ends up to be a poor way to present information in hindsight. I don't know. But it was almost like every time he spoke, there was all this stuff. The killer who may be in this room. Like, that's a crazy thing to say. So those are a few things. I don't think that I forgot anything that I was, I had the moment where I was like, oh man, I forgot all this other stuff. I don't think I've additionally forgot more things, but maybe. But in any case, I assume we'll have a verdict sooner than later. You know, this jury's already been sequestered and away from work and family for a long time. And so I'm sure that they are as motivated as anyone to come to a conclusion, but they are clearly taking their time and I guess wanting to come to a non-flippant conclusion, which is what you want for sure. Not doing it just to get it done, right? But actually trying to get it as right as they can with that mix of people. All right, folks, well, if you walked with me, we got 12 minutes in to kick the week off. And regardless of whether you walked or not, I certainly appreciate you watching this far. And as always, I will see you in the next video.